Good morning. I would like to begin today's meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the City Governance Committee meeting of the 16th of March 2022, and I declare this meeting open at 11:35 a.m. I would like to advise attendees in the room that this meeting is being webcasted and audio recorded, and I remind attendees to ensure that they are having necessary safety precautions. Do any councillors have a leave of absence to declare? And I note that Councillor Bannon is no longer here. So we have a leave of absence on the board. Would anyone like to move that Councillor Bannon is not here? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Anyone like to second? Thank you, Councillor Russell. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. That has been carried. Mr. Mayor, are you voting? Thank you. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to get straight into it, and I will now refer to item 4.1, and I will ask Ms. Caroline Bugg, Finance Manager, to please enter the discussions. Before we open discussion, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being none, I will hand straight over to Ms. Bugg. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Item 4.1 is the Executive Financial Report for the end of January. I take the report as read and provide the following comments. Overall, the surplus is still strong at the end of January with a surplus of $9.4 million. The main driver behind this result is the lower than expected operating expenses. The major variances are explained in the report. Noting the risk and related issues in the recruitment area is by default leading to an underspend in expenditure. There is also an ongoing variance regarding to the purchase of and sale of water, and this is a significant contributor to the variance. The difference in the water to budget is due to a wetter than average summer period. There are also a couple of events and risks that may impact on the financial position stated in this report, but are not considered in this report. The recent flooding event occurring last week before, has occurred after the reporting period, and also the recent rapid rise in the cost of fuel, particularly diesel. This issue may have an impact across the entire supply chain, and the longer the increases persist. We'll make note of these risks in future reports. In relation to the flooding, I'd like to mention the relief package, which includes financial support from Council for those directly impacted by the flooding. The rates rebate portion of the relief package will be processed in the last levy of this financial year. That's the quarter April through June. The finance branch is to receive a listing of residences that have been directly impacted, and will process the rebate against each of these properties. The owners do not need to worry about registering or applying for the rebate. The financial relief for businesses impacted by the flooding event is being processed separately to the rates component. Another impact of the weather event and the subsequent clean-up is that we have diverted a number of council resources away from business as usual, and potentially this could impact on capital delivery if the recovery period is over a long period of time. The financial impacts of this will be noted in future reports. Back to the report, and you'll note there are no issues in the rates and charges area. We've only had a small number of residents contact us regarding financial hardship in relation to the flooding. That is one of the components of the relief package. The team are working with those residents that have made contact to reach an agreed plan for the rate account payments. In regard to the sundry debtors, please note a couple of payments since the report was published, and they are both the payment for Department of Main Roads, $550,000 has been received, and just in relation to the amount of $337, that invoice is very likely to be reversed and reissued because there's been changes to the project scope. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I have a question from Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, through the chair. Good morning. I'm just curious, on page 9, it says capital expenditure is below budget 20%. Is that because of the weather, or where has that come from? I know I've got a few projects, LIP projects that have been delayed from COVID and rain. Can you just elaborate, please?
Thank you, councillor. You're right, there is the weather, the impact from weather, there's impact from COVID. The major variants in the capital project are the large water projects. So the Beenleigh wastewater treatment plant, the gasification, they're both running behind schedule and they are very large amounts of money. So that's where that percentage goes up fairly quickly.
Just to capture what you said before, that'll be in a future report, more detail. Yep. Okay.
So in the quarterly reports where we talk to the capital program, they were noted in there in December and they will again at the end of March.
Thank you. Councillor Stamp and Councillor Raven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I just wanted to understand when the other main roads payments are likely to be paid, please.
Thank you, councillor. Through the chair, we are in contact with both the branch that has instigated the invoice and also with Main Roads. It's just a delay in process. We're not exactly sure when the payments will come in, but we have no doubt that they will be in. So,
Thank you. Councillor Raven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Another question, just some feedback around communications for the rebate. So I noticed in the media release that the language was unclear, saying that properties that were inundated could receive the rebate. That's not the case. And when I spoke to media, they very kindly said the subject matter expert approved the language. So just want to make sure that when we've got something like that, I've been contacted a number of times by residents who think they're eligible because they had water through their shed, and then I'm the lucky duck who gets to tell them no. Sorry, you don't, and we're sorry that the media release was unclear. So if we could just make sure that those little details are included, it just stops confusion. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was actually just going to state that I know that not all residents have contacted me, so I'm not sure that even all residents have contacted council to let them know that they actually have been inundated with water through their homes and that sort of thing. So I would suggest to those that are watching at home if they can contact their councillor and just let them know as well. Any other questions from anyone? No? We'll put a motion up on the screen in just a moment. Do I have a mover for the motion? Thank you. Councillor Murphy has moved. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Thank you. Councillor Bradley. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We will now move on to item 4.2, and I will now, does anyone have any conflict of interest to declare on 4.2? No. I will now note that 4.2 is confidential. It is considered necessary to take the discussion of this report into closed session as the report and attachments do contain detailed budget information. Do any councillors wish to move into confidential? No. Yes. Councillor Bradley has moved. Does anyone want to second? Councillor Karansky, thank you, has seconded that. All those in favour of moving into confidential, please raise your hand. Okay. That has not been carried unanimously. Mayor Power, how do you vote? To move us into confidential or not? Yes, Mayor Power has. Councillor Hall, how do you vote?
Against.
Against. Everyone else was in favour, noting that Councillor Bannon is not present. So we will just take a moment to make sure recording is off. move out of confidential, and then we will put the motion on the screen. Thank you, councillors. There is a motion on the screen. If you could cast your eye over the motion. Would anyone like to move the motion on the screen? Thank you. Councillor Bradley has moved. Would someone like to second the motion that's on the screen? Thank you, Councillor Russell. All those in favour of the motion on the screen, please raise your hand. Thank you. That has been carried unanimously, noting that Councillor Bannon's not here today. All right, that marks the end of Miss Bugg's reports. Does anyone have any GB for Miss Bugg? No? Do you have any for us? Nope. No, thank you, Chair. Lovely. Thank you very much. And we will move on to item 5.1. Can I please ask the Administration Manager, Ms Kay Sullivan, to please pop up? Before we enter discussion, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? No, there being none. I do note that 5.1 is considered necessary to take the discussion of this report into a closed session, as the report and attachments contain detailed budget information. Do any councillors wish to move into closed session for this one? No? Okay. There being none, please proceed. Just be mindful that we are not in confidential. We are in open session with your questions. And over to you, Ms Sullivan. Thank you.
Good morning, councillors, and thank you, Madam Chair. I will take the report as read, and noting we're not in confidential, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you. No one actually asked to go into confidential, so I'm happy to move the recommendations if there's no questions.
Does anyone else have anything? Great. The motion is on the board or on the screen. Councillor Bradley has moved. Would anyone like to second the motion? Thank you, Councillor Fraser. All those in favour of the motion? Thank you. That's been carried unanimously. Whipping through it today. Excellent. Now, sorry, I need to keep up. Awesome. So that marks the end of Miss Sullivan's reports today. Does anyone have any GB for her? No? Do you have any for us?
Nothing today, thank you.
Perfect. Oh, hang on. We have Councillor Lane.
Sorry about that. Kay, I just want to say a big thank you to you and your team for the work that you're undertaking on the recovery efforts. I know it's not easy. I know you've been on call 7 days a week, and I just want to say a big thanks to your team. Filtering through councillors' requests and things like that can often be time consuming, so cheers to you guys.
Councillor Lane, thank you very much for your feedback. It's very much appreciated. I think the current model that we have in place is working very well from my perspective as well. So thank you for all the intel that you're feeding through to me from your residents.
Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Raven.
Just want to echo Councillor Lane's sentiment that the community-led approach is a great one. I know it's not what we did last time, and it's fantastic to see it being done. It was also great to see flipping some sausages and some bacon on a Sunday morning, showing your commitment to that approach. And just wanted to praise you and the entire recovery team for the great work you're doing. I think I've told everybody, every single reporting line above you, what a good job you're doing. So now I'm telling you as well. So good work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Councillor Raven, you standing in while Councillor Lane was yes, very good working relationship there as well, and your energy and commitment to your community was very much appreciated as well.
Lovely. Thank you. All right, moving right along, we are going to go to 6.1, and we are asking Miss Anita White, who has stepped into the Acting Corporate Governance Manager position for a while, to enter discussion. Do any councillors have a conflict of interest? No? There being none, I will hand over to Miss White.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Mr Mayor and councillors. Item 6.1 relates to proposed amendment of the staff interaction procedure and acceptable requests guideline. I will take the report as read, however I did want to highlight a few points for you. The amendments are relatively minor and essentially add positions across 4 branches to allow councillors to make contact directly with those officers. These amendments are appropriate as the roles sit across key areas including grants, road infrastructure planning and customer service. Could I apologise for the late amendments by way of the addendum? They're aimed at simply ensuring consistency between section 2.3 and section 4 of the acceptable request guidelines with the addition of the new roles. I would also, with your indulgence, like to propose a further recommendation, which is to correct the legislative reference in clause 3 of the policy. The meeting services team will display that updated recommendation for your consideration. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Councillor Heremiah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious about the approach that was taken when it comes to defining which council officers councillors can request advice and communicate with. It seems rather ludicrous to have almost a page of all these different roles, everything from the CEO to directors to managers, all the way down to officers and coordinators, even team leaders and advisors, media advisors. Why was it chosen to take almost a prescriptive approach of listing each and every role that a councillor can talk to, and why wasn't it taken? Why was an approach taken that is more common sense, more logical, and less intensive on resources, where it says a councillor can communicate to council officers as long as it is within their code of conduct and taken in good faith, etc. I'm curious as to why it was chosen. These roles can be talked to instead of just putting trust in a councillor and a councillor's judgment to choose if this is appropriate, and if there would be an issue, it would be escalated through the channels that have already been established by legislation, by regulation, and by councillors' code of conduct. We see that approach was taken when it comes to the Chief Executive Officer. In item 2.6, it talks about view-only access to documents, and the CEO can determine that view-only access to information can be provided to a councillor in some specific prescriptive scenarios, but then there's also a clause that states that the CEO has discretion that if they believe that a document is of a sufficient confidential nature that a risk could arise in the provision of that document, they can choose to make a view only to councillors. So this policy, this procedure puts trust in the CEO's judgment. I'm curious as to why trust isn't placed in councillors' judgment when it comes to which council officers they should talk to, especially since we have some of the strongest accountability structures in Queensland as councillors. I'm curious about the approach that was taken by listing roles instead of just a more common sense way of doing it.
Okay, we might just hop over to Mr. Strachan to start answering. You've got quite a few details and information in there, so.
So thank you, Councillor, for your question. It's a good question. The acceptable request guidelines have always listed numerous officers across council that are able to provide advice. It's not so much a reflection of a lack of trust in councillors. It's an attempt by management to ensure that you're getting the correct advice. So these officers that have been listed because they provide particular and expert or content expert advice to councillors. If it was not, I suppose, if they weren't listed, there could be a risk that you would be receiving advice from officers who aren't appropriately qualified to provide that advice, or they don't have the holistic knowledge required to provide you with accurate advice. So this is a way of trying to targeting the advice that you're getting to make sure that the advice that you're getting is correct advice.
Councillor Herman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that's a fair point. I understand it and I accept it. But it seems like a better solution to that would be by issuing work directions to council officers saying that if you're not an expert in this area, please refer that councillor request to someone who is an expert, rather than embedding it into a council policy and procedure that if councillors break, even accidentally, can be liable to some very serious consequences. Seems like there would be an easier and better solution to that problem than the solution in front of us today.
All right, we'll go to Councillor Lane.
I'm so glad of your answer there, Robert, because recently I was in a meeting with a council officer who is not on this list, who is my expert subject person on their particular branch. And I said to them, am I allowed to request information from you? And they said, I don't know. And I said, well, let's have a look. And as it turns out, I'm not allowed to contact them, but they are the expert person on that, given the number of people that step up into roles that have expert knowledge in various branches, but who are not on that list. And I suppose I don't want to step outside what is the acceptable request guidelines. I don't want to be cautioned or sanctioned for doing such. But the very person that I need to contact is the one person that's probably not on that list. So, yeah, I understand where Councillor Herrimeyer is coming from with the frustration with that.
Thank you. Councillor Raven?
Madam Chair, could see my hand move even just this much, and she knew I wanted to comment. Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. While I totally sympathise with where you're coming from, Councillor Herrimeyer, the ARGs are often a rubbing point for councillors, and they were last term as well when we realised that the policy actually didn't align with the legislative requirements and hadn't for a long time. So now it does, which is great. Thank you, Anita, and to Robert for making sure that's the case. The advantage, I guess, of the prescriptive nature is that, as Councillor Lane said, there's no grey areas, and staff who might feel an obligation to provide you a response because you've asked politely, they do know the answer, but they may not be across all the detail that their reporting lines up the chain do, may give you advice that's not helpful. So I guess that's the reason why it's better for them to check that and go, you know what, I can just say very easily to the councillor, sorry, I can't give you that advice, but my boss can, or something to that effect. And it takes the pressure off the staff member. ARGs are a restriction on our own powers under the legislation that we have an obligation to impose upon ourselves. Bit of a weird system, which is why it doesn't make much sense the way it gets done, because we're being forced to restrict our own abilities to ask for information and advice from the organisation. But I completely understand the desire for efficient policy, and I'm keen to see if with an acting governance manager in the role, she might cast a very sharp mind to it and see what she can come up with.
Thank you. Councillor Bradley?
Thank you, through the chair. And I've got a couple of things I'd like to say. I can understand why 2.6 is there, having been here for a while, and things that have happened in the past. That's all I'll say. I just want to clarify, though, with you, Anita, if I may. The Process Liaison Officer for Road Infrastructure Planning, and by the way, there's a spelling mistake in that next, under the reason column. What is that? I'm just curious who that is. Like, I'm just wondering if my traffic engineer that comes and meets with me and gives me advice, is he covered?
Sorry, through the chair. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to give you the name of that person.
That's fine, but I just want to make sure that my traffic engineer who gives me advice is in here.
I'll jump in. Traffic engineers are listed, and they are P. And that is on page 43, I think it is.
The primary, sorry, Madam Chair, with your indulgence, Councillor Lane said that's for the principal traffic engineers. The principal traffic engineer is line Q, traffic engineer is line P.
Okay, as long as he's covered, and but my other concern is sometimes, like, I've got a new advisor, and in the first few days they tried to find out some stuff, and unfortunately got pushed around and whatever to a point of probably pushing this envelope a little bit. So I just want to make sure that the organisation, the staff, know who as well, because it's particularly for advisors that have just started and possibly don't know, that they could potentially do the wrong thing. So as long as the organisation, it's communicated within as well.
Through the chair, we will do that. We'll send out the details of the amendments that are discussed here today, just to assure there is an awareness now. I would encourage your advisors, if they're unsure as who to talk to the director or manager and seek their advice in relation to who would be the appropriate person to talk.
And I do believe they go through the training and stuff as well, don't they? There is a certain training module that they have to do, so with their code of conduct, so they know who they can and can't talk to. It might just be a bit of a learning curve for them, but that's okay. I was just going to ask, so is it okay for people not on this list that work for council if they contact us as councillors? Because I do sometimes have people out in the community that often work and live in my community, and they actually do reach out to me and stuff like that. But they contact me. I don't know who they are normally in community. So, yes.
So if this is, so just through the chair to clarify, so that's someone who lives in your division, lives in the community, and they're contacting you with regard to an issue they might have in relation to their residents, yet that they still have all the rights of a local resident to raise those concerns with council. I guess the section of the guidelines it does cover around, obviously you do live in the local community with a lot of staff, and you will come across them from time to time, and that's completely acceptable that you talk and interact. I guess though, if it's not in relation to a particular matter or concern that they've got with regard to council, there shouldn't be, I suppose, that informal discussion in relation to council matters outside of the workplace and outside of the bounds of the ARGs. But if they're raising a concern they've got in relation to their bin collection, for example, that's completely fine.
Excellent. Does anyone else have any questions to ask? Councillor Hall.
Thank you. Through the chair. Can you imagine if this was written the other way around? Yeah, no. Like the councillors could decide what the CEO can or cannot see, or the councillors can decide refusal to provide information or advice. Freedom and access to information goes both ways. And I can't support anything which limits my ability to have access to information or access to advice in this role as a councillor. It has been more and more of our ability to do that has been taken away through things that have happened in the past. And once again, this is throwing judgment on existing councillors based on what councillors have done in the past. I cannot support that. My role as a councillor is being a conduit to my residents and making sure that council's processes are clear and transparent. To make sure that in my capacity as a councillor, I can make sure that what council is doing is clear and transparent to them. How can I honestly do that when I have view-only access to documents? Things like refusal to provide advice or information. So if I should request for information, it can be denied or chosen to by the CEO. It's just, I just don't see it. And it may not, what we may have may not align with the ARGs, but maybe what we have is better than what the ARGs are. How can we take any more of our rights away? And you can say all this like, well, perhaps this person was the wrong person to give that advice to council. What's that person doing in that role in the first place? They're making those decisions.
We're actually not taking rights away. We're actually adding some more roles that we can talk to. So we're not taking roles away. We're adding some more. So
what is this view-only access to documents?
That hasn't changed. So Mr. Strachan will respond to that one.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. So that is an existing section of the ARGs. So that is there's no proposal to change that particular section. But to talk to that particular section, since you've raised the concern, that is really under a limited set of circumstances which are articulated in section 2.6, where the CEO may take the view that releasing the document in terms of providing it in hard copy or through email is not appropriate. Now, that's only in a very limited set of circumstances, and it's very much the exception rather than the rule. It talks about in that particular section where the document is of historical significance and could be damaged if it's copied. So if we were to photocopy it, it could damage the historical document. So in that particular case, the preference would be that you have a look at the original document in a certain way at a certain time, where the scanning of the information that you've requested, so it's so voluminous in terms of the information that it could it would be unreasonable and it would divert significant resources to copying that particular information. So that information would be made available in its raw form to you at a certain time and place. If an act or agreement signed by a council states that a document is not to be copied or reproduced, so if we're bound by legislation, we would need to provide it in other ways. Or if the contents of the document are considered by the Chief Executive Officer to be of such a confidential nature that a risk could arise if the provision of the document is in hard copy or electronic format. So a lot of documents that are highly sensitive and confidential in nature, on some rare occasions, the CEO may decide it's best you come and have a look at the document rather than reproducing it or emailing it to the individual councillor. So I must stipulate, these are in the rarest of circumstances that decision would be taken.
Councillor Hall, are you okay with that? So we're actually adding a few people, but those things haven't changed. They're still part of the ARGs under legislation.
Even if they've already been in place, supporting this would be acknowledging and accepting those as the due process, and I certainly do not. So, thank you.
Thank you. Just another question. Are we able to, if we're out there and we are talking to staff, are we able to see if we can actually get some more staff added to this list on an ad hoc manner?
When the original ARGs were, I suppose, adopted when we came back from interim administration, there was a much shorter list.
Yep.
There was a much longer list. It's probably shorter than the list has been historically, but if you have identified a need to interact or seek advice from a specialist within the organisation, we're happy to hear of that. We will also take Councillor Herremeyer's feedback on board, and I will work with Anita to put our heads together to work out if there is a more efficient way under the legislation to construct the ARGs.
Thank you. Councillor Raven and then Councillor Herremeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just teeing off from that question, once upon a time, the list was 2 pages. Like, it was much, much longer because there were so many people who'd been added to the list over time that councillors could speak to. The part that I like that we have now, and I don't remember if it was in the previous one, is that if an officer contacts you, you can respond to them. And any officer can contact you with the blessing of their team leader or program leader. So if they are the most appropriate person to speak to you because they are the expert, then and they contact you, then you can engage with them on that matter, which I think solves your ad hoc issue, because it saves us having a list of 3 pages worth of different positions that we could contact. As long as we know someone's talking to us first, we're all good, and I'm comfortable with that approach. Councillor Hall, to allay your fears, I've only ever once been given restricted access to a document, view-only access, and it was the sealed findings of a court case. So there was no legal way to give me a copy of that. That's the only time I've had view-only access in 6 years, and I asked for some pretty hairy stuff, don't I, Robert? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Herremeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director, for taking that on board and putting some of your time to the side to consider that. I find it difficult to understand how we strive for good governance, yet we even consider the idea of an ad hoc report coming up to governance committees over and over again to extend a list. If legislation states that we have to have a policy regarding ARGs, that's great. We've got to meet it and we've got to go above and beyond. But if that legislation states that we have to specifically mention every single role title by name, that's a different case. I don't think legislation states that, and we'll get legal advice on that. But I'm pretty sure that if that legislation does exist, it would state that we need an ARG, and we get to write the ARGs, and we can include in the ARGs, instead of a prescriptive list, we can include a process that includes discretion and includes trusting the councillor's judgment. And if they get their judgment wrong, councillors will be subject to many standards of accountability. I would appreciate if the Director could send some information on how much internal time and cost it takes to present this specific report just to update the list. So estimated cost of internal council hours, so we can understand the consequences of bringing up regular ad hoc reports, and how writing a report isn't free and does cost the ratepayer resources. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I was just talking to Mr. Strachan and we're just saying, we might take it offline with you, sit down and catch up and nut out exactly what process you actually want to see, so that we can actually see if we can have a process, if we have to keep going down this path and see which way would function better for us. Mayor Powell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I respect Councillor Heremeyer's opinion. That's one person's opinion. Some of us may want to have a list. Okay? So I understand where you're getting at. I don't believe that it's going to quantify any amount of time adding a name on a list. Once that name is on the list, it's not an issue. But as a previous council officer in positions where you don't want to talk to councillors, and I would understand that, because they feel if you were to ask them a question, they would feel they're put on notice, and really their pay scale doesn't warrant them having to address you. Okay, and if you want to ask the gardener at the back about a policy, I'm quite sure that the gardener is not going to be able to tell you about a policy. So unless we've got this in place, we've got nothing concrete, something that's a guide, so that we've got somewhere to start from. I don't want this situation where we make our own judgment. That's where mistakes are made. We make a judgment on who's on that list and we ask appropriately. That's my opinion, and just like your opinion, I accept your opinion, but I think we've all got different opinions in this room.
Thank you, Mayor Power. Councillor Raven again.
Sorry, just a question to clarify something for my peace of mind. I'm not, and either to Anita or Robert, whoever remembers, so chairpersons don't have the ARGs applied to them because we have an exemption under Local Government Act, is that correct? So within our own portfolio, if we need advice from staff of any level, they can engage with us and we can engage with them freely, is that right?
That is correct.
And that has nothing to do with this policy?
That's a legislative exemption from the ARG. So if a chair of a committee has a question that relates to that portfolio, the business of that committee, then the ARGs don't apply.
And I understand that probably doesn't apply to deputy chairs because the legislation doesn't envisage that. But what about like a chair of a special committee, like the audit committee or the procurement committee? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Are they included? Local disaster committee?
It would only be local government committees, so standing committees.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is a motion on the board or on the screen. Mayor Power has moved the motion. Thank you. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Thank you. Councillor Raven has seconded that. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, that has not been carried unanimously. Councillor Hall, how do you vote?
Strongly against.
Thank you. Councillor Herremeyer.
Against.
Thank you. All right. Before we open discussion, does anyone have any conflicts of interest to declare on 6.2? There being none, I will hand over to Ms. White. Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair, item 6.2 relates to determination of community benefit fund requests. Again, councillors, I will take the report as read. However, we would like to advise that the report relates to 2 applications for CBF funding. Both relate to applications for Girl Guides Queensland, one from Browns Plain District in Division 7 and one from Springwood in Division 1. The reason that this report is brought to Council for consideration is that Girl Guides Queensland is a state organisation and therefore not an organisation based in Logan, which is a requirement of the policy. However, the applications do benefit the Logan community. The divisional councillors are supportive of the applications to the financial amounts outlined in the report, and there is sufficient money available to meet these requests. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And just before I go to Councillor Raven, I do have one very quick one. What is the difference between Girl Guides and Scouts? Because I know I have had one of my Scouts groups, they have applied to me, but I don't believe it came up through this process. I was able to award them CBF straight away. So I'm just wondering, is there a difference between Scouts? Are they branch or are they Queensland?
I'd have to take that one on notice. I'm not aware of the organisational structure of Scouting Queensland.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Raven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Anita, you might remember in your previous role, was there scuttlebutt that Guides Queensland were thinking about moving to Logan? Because they currently hold a lease in Marsden. Do you hear anything about that? That would solve us with this problem, wouldn't it, though, if they moved to Marsden?
No, through the chair, I wasn't aware of that. That didn't come to me. I'd be happy to take it offline and ask the question. But yes, it would solve the
problem.
question if Guides Queensland was located in.
There you go.
Thank you. Councillor Lane.
It's a really out of the blue sort of question. When you're doing community benefit funding, do you look at the groups and ask what percentage of the people in that group are actually from Logan?
Thank you, through the chair. In this circumstance, because the huts, if that's the right term, are located within Logan, it's an assumption I would suggest that the people that are benefiting are residents of Logan.
Thank you. Councillor Fraser or Councillor Bradley, do either of you want to add anything because they're both in your division? Councillor Bradley?
I'm happy to add. With the Springwood Girl Guides, it's almost like an affiliate of the Underwood Park Girl Guides, so which is actually called Birchdale Girl Guides. But they are constituents from the city, if that assures you. It's just, yeah, that is where their facility is. And it actually wasn't activated for quite a while, so they're only really starting to activate that space now, which is good.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? No? Would someone, we're going to put up two motions for consideration. We're going to put them both up separately. So the first one is for Division 7 and it is on the board. Do I have a mover for the motion? Thanks. Oh, so we need to decide if it's going to be approved or not approved. Okay, so first of all, we need to approve it or not approve it before we can actually go for the motion. So we're going to vote on approving it. Is that what we're doing? So can I have a show of hands? Is that what we're going to do?
And
Move to approve? Yes.
and the reason being that there's a significant benefit to members of the Logan community.
Okay, we don't need a reason if it's approved. Okay. So Councillor Fraser has moved that one. Do we all need to vote on it? Okay, so we need a mover. So Councillor Fraser has moved the Division 7. Do I have a seconder for that one? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. All those in favour, please raise a hand. Thank you. That's been carried unanimously. We're going to roll straight into Division 1 or, yep, okay. So a mover for Division 1 is Councillor Bradley. Awesome. And do I have a seconder to approve this one? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. All right, I was slightly confused. Now we've approved them. Yes, Mayor Powell.
To the director, wouldn't it be better if we actually have separate reports for each one of these? That way we don't confuse them, we have them separate, and we can deal with them individually as per the report.
So through the chair, Mr. Mayor, they both relate to exceptions under the Community Benefit Fund. So generally, all matters in relation to the Community Benefit Fund are put into one report. They are articulated separately in the report. There are two separate sections of the report which deal with the Brown Plains District Girl Guides, and there's another section that deals with the Springwood Girl Guides. So they are dealt with separately within the report. Yeah, if we had two reports, each report would have a different recommendation. So in one report we have multiple recommendations. We often have council reports where we deal with multiple recommendations attached to one report.
The girls did just ask me if I wanted to do separate or keep them the same, and I did say to keep them separate, so it was very transparent. So if you want me to keep it all the same or separate, I'm happy to talk next time beforehand. All right, that marks the end of the acting corporate governance manager's reports. Does anyone have any GB for Miss White? No? Do you have any for us?
Not today, thank you.
All right, she has her training wheels on for a little while, so be nice. Awesome. That completes the agenda for today. Does anyone have any general business for Mr. Strachan this morning? No? Do you have any for us? No? I would just like to pass a very quick thanks to everyone in all the directorates and how they have proceeded and how they've worked with us during the floods and that sort of thing. So well done, and you know, all our best to the communities that are still going through flood recoveries and stuff like that. So I declare the City Governance Committee meeting of the 16th of March 2022 concluded at 12:24 p.m. Thank you.